In this episode of the How to Do Your 20s podcast, I'm really excited. We have Stephan Kesting on. He's someone that I've been following his YouTube videos for a long time. He talks about Jiu Jitsu, talks about grappling arts, and I've recently restarted doing Jiu Jitsu, so this is perfect timing for me. Plus, I am very envious of how he's been able to build such a great YouTube channel and be able to take his passion, which is grappling, and turn it into a source of like his life, his income, and everything. So without any further ado, Stephan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm very glad that you're letting me on here, even though I'm well out of my 20s. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate you making an exception for me.
No, I mean, that's a common misconception I think a lot of people have
Yeah.
is it's really about getting
Yeah.
people that are wise, such as yourself, coming on
Oh.
and telling us youngsters that don't really know a lot about what we're doing and helping us. But in
Well,
this,
they say that intelligence is learning from your own mistakes and wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes. So I'll be happy to share some of my mistakes with you and your audience if that passes as wisdom. So be it.
yes, absolutely. So first off, let's get started with your story. How did you get involved in grappling and then eventually be able to make it into your full-time life and income?
Hmm. Well, I think the grappling thing goes back to wanting to be a ninja. When that whole craze broke in the late 70s, early 80s, every kid worth his salt wanted to be a ninja. So, and I'd been fascinated with martial arts since I was a really small kid. Of course, my mom was not so hot on having her kid, throwing stars and sneak around in black and assassinate people. So there was a lot of pushback, and it took, I think, 4 or 5 years of concerted effort to be allowed to study any martial art at all. And that first martial art was judo. I had lobbied for karate. I'd lobbied for traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu. I'd lobbied for kendo. The only one she would accept was judo. So, I've got my favorite martial arts certificate of all time is this thing that I scribbled in crayon when I was 8. It's like, I want to go judo. It is not fighting. I want to go now, or I will go on strick. Basically, the carrot and the stick, and it didn't work. Uh, so then, when I turned 12, I was finally allowed, and so arguably my first martial art was a grappling martial art. Judo and jiu-jitsu are very, very closely related. One came from the other, and there's still a ton of overlap. And then as I got older, I became more autonomous, and I was allowed to study and train what I wanted, and those involved things like kung fu and jeet kune do and kembo and lots of martial arts, some of which were good, some of which were not so good, and spent a lot of time in a deep horse stance working my reverse punch. And then that whole Gracie in action phase began. This was before the UFC broke. This was in the late 80s when the Gracies were putting out their VHS tapes. If any of your audience has heard of these things, they're great big. Just think, it's like a YouTube video on a giant cassette with much less better video quality. I'm joking, of course. Of course, y'all know what a VHS tape is. And they were the Gracie in action videos of the Gracies basically going up against other styles and, hotshot karate guys, hotshot capoeira guys, hotshot kickboxing guys, and person after person after person just not having an answer for the ground game, for the clinch, the takedown, and the ground game. So it became obvious pretty quickly that this was something that had to be worked on. And at the time I was training in Kaiju Kembo with Philip Gelina in Montreal, Canada. And I was really lucky in the sense that he had a little bit of grappling background, but way more important than that, his identity as a teacher, as a person, wasn't threatened by the fact that some of his students wanted to train something that he didn't know or didn't know that deeply at the time. So he allowed us to, stay after class and made the space available to us and would give us little pointers. And we basically just roll around on the ground with full-on eye gouging, full-on hair pulling. If you could submit the guy by covering his mouth with your hand or twisting his fingers, so be it. I mean, we were all friends, so we were trying not to injure each other. For the most part, we succeeded. And that was a couple of years of doing that. So although we weren't formally learning jiu-jitsu, we had basically internalized the concept that it's better to be on top than on bottom, and that if you twist something hard enough, the odds are pretty good the other guy will tap out. And knowing that, and maybe just a touch more stuff that I'd learned in judo or that we'd learned in Jiu Jitsu or through the Kajikembo system, we came up with a fairly decent background or base layer of grappling. So I credit that with a lot. I credit it for a couple of reasons. Just any time spent rolling around against full resistance or close to full resistance is going to be beneficial. So if anybody's out there and like, oh man, I live in, Podunk, Missouri, and there's no school in Podunk, well, it's okay. All you need is a training partner. All you need is a mat and a training partner. In the summertime, you don't even need a mat. You just need a tarp spread out on the grass. And you can make half decent progress, because we made half decent progress. And then eventually I came back to judo. I realized that judo was the closest thing to jiu-jitsu at the time, especially if I concentrated on the newaza component, which means the groundwork. And then slowly, jiu-jitsu instructors started showing up. The first guy I trained with was a blue belt. And this was back in the day when, like, oh my God, did you hear that there's a blue belt in town? And now blue belts are a dime a dozen, but at the time they were really rare. And I was really lucky that that guy, Przemek Drabczynski, how's that for a Polish mouthful, was really a good teacher. He was a very solid blue belt. He was open-minded. He was still studying. He was still learning. And he gave us a really good grounding. And then, after a while, then we started getting more and more and more grappling coming in. I started training with Eric Paulson. I started training with Marcus Suarez. Started training with other people. But I started concentrating on the early phase of that, because it just shows how much you can do with what might not seem like a whole lot of resources. I mean, back in the day, you were lucky if you had a VHS tape that showed you 5 techniques. And they might not be good techniques, but they were 5 techniques. Now, you could get 5 techniques. You could watch 5 techniques in as fast as long as it takes you to watch 5 techniques. You just go online, type up jiu-jitsu technique, and you'll be inundated with endless jiu-jitsu videos. So at that point, it's not the content, it's the context that people start needing, right? There's so much stuff, it's overwhelming, they've got no idea where to start. So now the game's more about context rather than just, content, any content at all. So that's the Cook's tour. That's the crash course on my jiu-jitsu background.
So one of the things I want to talk about now is where to start. Obviously, I think the first thing I would think at least is finding a gym or a place to train at, or a training partner. But let's say you can do that. What techniques should you start to focus on? How should that whole thing go?
Okay. Assuming you have somebody to train with, and if you don't have somebody to train with, and there's no gym, and there's no judo, and there's no wrestling, well, I'm sorry. You might be able to learn a teeny tiny bit by pretending to do it on your grappling dummy or your protesting girlfriend or your dog or something, but it's really not going to work. The magic of jiu-jitsu is in the resistance, right? So you need to train with resistance ultimately. So where do you start? I wrote a book about this that I've got online. It's a roadmap for BJJ, and it covers this in detail. It's also free if you look it up. Roadmap for BJJ, you should find it on my site. Anyhow, the idea is that there are really only somewhere between 6 and 8 central positions in jiu-jitsu. Of course, there are variations, and of course, there are positions that don't fit, but most of the time, 80% of the time, you're going to be in one of those 6 or maybe 8 positions. Is it okay if I go into a little bit of detail?
Yes.
Okay. So especially with the advent of MMA and the popularity of the UFC, people will have some idea now, whereas 10 years ago, I would have had to be describing, like, imagine lying on the back and holding another man between your legs, and I'd lose half the audience right there. But so the 6 basic positions are the guard, the knee mount, the side mount, the full mount, the back mount, and the turtle. So those are 6 positions. For the guard, you can divide that into closed guard, half guard, and open guard. So of course, that's just a first order approximation. There are lots of variations. Well, what about north-south position? Well, it's kind of a variation of side mount. What about spider guard? Well, it's kind of a variation of open guard. As long as you've got those 6 positions, guard, knee mount, full mount, side mount, rear mount, and the turtle in your head, and then realize that the guard can very roughly be divided into closed, half, and open guard, you've got sort of a basic layout. The next thing you have to realize is that some positions are better than other positions. It is better to be in the mount than it is to be in somebody's guard. It is better to be on somebody's back in rear mount than it is to be in side mount. Some positions are intrinsically better, and this is rewarded in the Jiu Jitsu system by points, and it's rewarded in an MMA system by being able to punch the guy's lights out, right? If you have me pinned in side control, you can do some damage to me. But if you are mounted on me, now you've got gravity and reach, and you can do a whole lot more damage. So the mount is better than the side mount in most applications. And once you realize that there's this hierarchy of positions, then once you realize that there's this hierarchy of positions, then it becomes a question of learning the transitions between those positions and learning a couple of attacks from each position. So if you're just starting out, for each of those 6 positions, you should learn a couple ways to get out of them. You should learn a couple basic guard passes. You should learn a couple ways to escape from side mount, a couple ways to escape from mount, a couple ways to escape from the back. And conversely, you should learn a couple ways to attack from each of those positions. You should learn a couple of sweeps, or a sweep and an arm lock from the bottom of guard. You should learn, say an arm bar and a choke from mount. You should learn a couple of arm bars from side mount, or a choke and an arm bar from side mount. So from every position, top and bottom, you have a couple of options. All of a sudden, jiu-jitsu starts making a hell of a lot more sense, and it's no longer this super confused jumble where you've got arms and legs and bodies all over the place, and you got no idea what's going on and no idea what you should do next, because it's that confusion that kills you. In a real fight, if you're totally confused and you have no idea what's going on, that's only going to work against you, right? Even knowing, well, I'm in a terrible position, but this position is called side mount. And in general, my 2 options are put him in the guard or come to my knees and go for a single leg. If that's all you know, and of course there are more options than that, but if those are your only 2 things that you know, well, at least you got a plan. And plan, to quote a friend of mine, plan beats no plan every time.
So obviously there's a lot of different techniques to learn for takedowns, but if you could only recommend 1 or maybe 2 takedowns to learn for a beginner, which takedowns would you recommend?
If I had to recommend 1 or maybe 2 takedowns for a beginner, here's what I'd say. I'd say learn the clinch, because the clinch allows you, it's not a takedown, so I'm kind of cheating. I'm not answering your question. The clinch allows you to close the distance and prevent yourself from getting hit in a real fight. It's also used a ton in submission grappling. It's also used a ton in MMA. It's also used with variations with the cloth grips in judo, but just learning to manipulate somebody's body weight with your arms and with your own body and your legs is super useful. I'd say the next thing you have to learn is a double leg takedown. Not a double leg where you're hitting the knee on the ground the way that the freestyle wrestlers do, but just like a blast double leg, more like Randy Couture used to do, where you're essentially running through your opponent. You're level changing, you're dropping down, and then running through your opponent. That won't work in a pure wrestling context when the guy's super duper low and bent over at the waist and guarding his legs. But it'll work in most self-defense situations. It'll work in many submission grappling situations, especially, and it'll work in a ton of MMA situations, especially when the person has to be more upright, right? Because they don't want to get punted in the face. They're not going to be bent over. So it's not, you don't have to change level that much to shoot in. I'd say those would be the 2 basic places to start. Start with a clinch, start with a double leg. Another thing about the double leg is it works with the gi and without the gi. So it's not a gi-dependent technique the way that many judo throws tend to be. You can hit a double leg you used to be able to hit a double leg in judo. They banned it. I won a judo tournament once because of a double leg takedown on a really big guy. He came out just a towering monster of a guy. And we squared up, and I took a step back like I was scared, and I took a step back like I was scared. And every time I took a step back, he took a step forward. And I took a half step back, and he took a full step forward, and then I shot the double, and I took him down. There's no way I would have been able to throw him. My standing judo was not nearly good enough to do one of the classic judo throws on him, but the double leg worked. Of course, now they've made it illegal. So if you go back in time, you can win a judo tournament with a double leg takedown.
So to dive a little bit deeper on that, why a double leg versus, let's say, a single leg that seems, at least I'm a very beginner, once again, seems somewhat like similar things, but very different?
Yeah, and that's funny because I started out the same way. When I started, realizing that I had to learn some wrestling, it was like, I know what I'll do. I'll start with a single leg. That's obviously got to be half as complicated as a double leg, and it's not at all true. A double leg is essentially at its essence a football tackle. You're basically dropping your weight down and trying to cut the guy in half with your shoulder. Then you do other things to finish. I mean, there's a lot more nuances to that. There's counters that your guy can do, and you can do counters to the counter, and you can, grab high, you can grab low, you can, drive towards your head, you can take them over your head. There's a million different follow-ups. And a double leg does lead to a single leg does lead to a double leg. So they're connected. But the double leg, I think you can get away with a lesser amount of sophistication, and you can just go purely on kind of forward aggression energy. And it basically, at a very simple level, Travis, you can run faster forward than I can back. So if you're kind of impeding my legs with your hands and running forward as fast as you can, I'm going to fall over. Single legs are more technical, more complicated, because it's not just a bulldozer move. The finishes to it are often have more steps, or more complicated. They're more intricate. I mean, it's also a really good move. If for some reason you end up becoming a single leg expert before a double leg expert, you're not doing anything wrong. I just think the double is a little bit more instinctive, a little bit simpler, and a little bit more applicable in a broad range of categories.
Nope, perfect answer. So I have one more specific question. I want to go back to general.
Of course.
And this more specific question is, obviously, once again, as a beginner, actually, in general, you find yourself in someone's guard very often. And something I'm very interested right now is learning a guard pass. So same question, if you only could focus on one or two guard passes as a beginner that you really want to hone in over time and master, what would they be and why?
That's a tougher question. That's a tougher question because it really depends on the types of guards that you're facing. If you're at a school or a club where you're mostly running into closed guard, you're probably going to have a different set of problems and a different set of answers than if everyone at the club is doing De La Hiva guard and going for barambolos. If everyone's doing butterfly guard, again, a different set of problems. So that's a very, very basic starting point. The bullfighter, the matador pass, where you essentially you stand up and you somehow get control over both of his feet, and you try and limit the amount of control that he has over you. You fake throwing his legs one way, and you throw them the other way, and you step forward to a knee mount. It's a basic technique, but with slight modifications. There's still world champions doing it, and you see this in MMA all the time. Especially instead of going to knee mount, you come in with a gigantic overhand right. So I've managed to stand up in your guard. I managed to open up your guard. I've got your ankles. I'm going to fake throwing them to my left. Then I'm going to actually throw them to my right. And as those legs go to my right, I come in with a giant right hand over top, kind of a flying Superman punch thing. Of course, you don't do the punching in the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu context or the submission grappling context, but the same guard pass is pretty reliable and it's pretty hard to stop. It's probably not going to take you by itself to the world championships, but it'll work for a long time. It's important to get some confidence fast, and then you can nuance it and massage it later. But as a white belt, as a beginner, you should probably have a couple of passes, and ideally you've got one kneeling pass and one standing pass, or one pass that goes to the left or one pass that goes to the right. That way they kind of go together. It's way, way, way harder to fight a boxer who's got a jab and a cross, as opposed to just a boxer and all he's got is the jab and it, or all he's got is the cross and it. It's predictable. So if you have two passes that go together, then that's a very, very powerful combination.
So let's get back into some more of the general stuff, pull the audience back in and talk about, get them back into hopefully actually going out doing jiu-jitsu.
Well, I think one important lesson here, Travis, is that we could have picked how to grab a person's wrist when you're doing the Kimura arm lock. And we could talk about that for 20 minutes. Or we could talk about how to grab the collar when you're doing a sliding collar choke. Or we could talk about where to put your hand on your opponent's leg when you're doing one specific guard pass. And we could get into a big argument. You could go, oh, you're an idiot. I always do it this way. You could cite 3 world champions who do it your way. And I could turn around and cite, it's a little bit of, who would win, Batman versus Superman. But we can go into extreme detail about all the positions and all the submissions. And it's actually a great thing because how often do you find boxers who are, if you go train boxing, you can learn the basic punches pretty quick and then you spend a lifetime refining them, but you're not finding huge new details or huge new variations.
Right.
Lennox Lewis never called anybody up and said, hey, I've just found a totally new way of throwing the right cross. Never happened. But jiu-jitsu guys all the time are going, even they've been doing it for 15 years. Hey, I just discovered this totally new submission or way of doing a submission that I've never seen before. So it allows the level of detail that you can get into can be intimidating, but on the other hand, it's also a giant strength if people are of an analytical bent. And if they're listening to your podcast, I'm guessing they're already more on the analytical side, because it shows you that it's not all about strength and brawn and endurance and fitness. I mean, of course, those things help, but you can go a tremendous way by just knowing more than your opponent, knowing more than your sparring partner. If you know a guard pass that he does not know, you've got a huge advantage. If you're better on 3 out of the 5 details for a triangle choke than he is at escaping it, you're probably going to choke him out. So it can be very encouraging to people to know that it's not just a battle of who's bigger, who's stronger, who's rougher, who's meaner, who played rugby as a kid and who didn't.
Absolutely. So that kind of leads up to the next question is, a lot of people start jiu-jitsu, but they never continue. Why do most people quit jiu-jitsu, and how can we fix that?
I think it's probably a couple reasons that people quit jiu-jitsu early in their training career is probably mainly 2 things. Number 1, injury. If you're going, it's a contact sport. Small injuries are inevitable. Hopefully larger injuries are avoidable. But if you're a meathead and you go in there and you don't tap, I've got a friend, every week he's got a new injury and his answer is always the same. Well, I didn't tap. I should have tapped. Well, eventually those small injuries can add up to a giant injury. The other thing is it's really hard on the ego, because unlike Kung Fu, where I could imagine that if I just concentrate hard enough, I can drive my hand into your rib cage and pull out your pulsing heart.
Yeah.
And we can never really prove that. In jiu-jitsu, you can have your hopes and dreams dashed pretty quickly. I could have the perfect theoretical guard pass that I'm going to use against you. And when push comes to shove and I try it out on you, you just crush me, right? Or you laugh at me and you armbar me and you do a little victory dance. That can be really hard on the ego. It can be super hard on the ego to find out all this theoretical base of knowledge when the rubber hits the road didn't do you any good. So it can be really hard on the ego. I think that's a big reason that people drop out. It's also physically tough. It's a great workout, but great workouts are by definition not easy. So I think people are expecting maybe an easy martial art. What's your biggest challenge when you're doing jiu-jitsu?
It's tough to say. I think right now for me, I really enjoy it. It's like one of my favorite things. So are you talking about like moves that I face or reasons I would potentially quit?
Yeah,
kind of
reasons you would potentially quit.
That's a really tough one, because like I said, right now I'm just so gung-ho about it. I
You've
guess
reached the fervent beginner stage,
yeah,
the new convert.
Realistically, injury would probably be the biggest thing. And that's, when you said about not tapping, I try to be pretty good at that, but every once in a while, actually just yesterday, I was doing a guard pass and someone got me in kind of I guess you'd call it like a wrist lock thing, and it bothered me, but it didn't bother me bad enough to tap. And then all of a sudden he kind of twisted and I'm like, all right, tap, tap, tap.
Yeah.
And it makes me think when you're saying this, like, you know what, when it bothers me a little bit, I should just say, all right, let's just reset. Like that hurts enough and I'm in a bad enough position. The reason it's extra tough though is every once in a while I'm in a bad position and I'm able to get out of it. And that
exactly.
feels, yeah.
So you're getting positive reinforcement for doing something that's potentially injurious. And that's very common. I'd say that there's kind of here's the progression. When you're a beginner and you don't know what's happening and it's hurting, tap out. As you get more experience, you get a little bit better at judging when something's, okay, this is just uncomfortable. This isn't likely to cause extreme damage. So the more experience you get, the better you can gauge how long to hold out and not to tap, or whether, it's just a question of holding on. But that also does backfire. I mean, there are lots of people I know who've been put to sleep on the mat thinking, oh, yeah, I can tough this out. And then they wake up having fallen asleep. Or worse, no, there's no bloody way I'm tapping to a stupid wrist lock. There's no pop, 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 pop. And now they're out for, so now they're out for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. So I think this is a lesson that repeats itself until learned. That the not tapping to stuff is a really dumb idea. And I mean, if you're in the world championships and you're in the finals match and you've got 10 seconds left and the guy's gotten you in an armbar and you think you might be able to get out, and that's a different decision. At that point, you're a black belt, you're a big boy, you can make your own decisions. But no battle in the gym, even if it's against your worst rival, even if it's against the guy that you have the biggest, most pitched battles with, is worth injury. Because if you get injured, you ain't training. And that guy's going to keep on training. He's going to get better than you. The best thing you can do to get better is to not get injured. And, this is something that, I've been doing martial arts for 35 years. Believe me, there are body parts of mine that belong on a 70-year-old. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but trust me, they're there. And if you grab them and start squeezing and twisting, I'm going to tap. It may not even be a submission. It's just me going, hey, better to tap out and live to train another day than to, be a real tough guy here, but then be buggered for the next 2 months as I'm recovering from that. So this is a lesson that also becomes more imperative as you get older and as all the stupid stuff that you did in your 20s catches up with you. Because I just heard this the other day. Every joint you abuse when you're young will have its revenge eventually. So, just life is long. And you're going to want those knees. You're going to want those hips. You're going to want those shoulders as you get into your ancient 40s, ancient 50s, and so on. Believe me.
Yep. No, I totally believe you. It's obviously something I've been trying to remind myself of more and more of. It's hard. It's hard to remember that when you want to win. You want to tap the other person. But it's good advice. Wise advice.
Well, tap out and then win with technique. Don't win with brute stupidity. Don't win with brute stubbornness. Stubbornness has a point. For example, when you're dead tired and you can barely move and you keep going, that's also developing your character. That's also developing your grit, your fortitude. Not tapping when you're caught in some twisting arm lock that's really hurting your shoulders, that's just stupid. No amount of grit or fortitude can make the rotator cuff muscles any stronger. So you last an extra 1 second before they tear. Stupid. But there are other times and places to push it. And as you get more experience, you'll realize, this position is really uncomfortable, but it's not fundamentally dangerous, so I'm not going to tap out. But in the beginning, you don't know. In the beginning, you have no idea. So tap. Ask the guy, was that a dangerous position? And when he laughs and goes, dude, I have no idea why you tapped. You're like, oh, okay. Well, now you know. Now you know for next time.
So other than not tapping, what are some of the biggest, let's say, mistakes or waste of time that you see white belts engaging in?
This is a mistake that varies from practitioner to practitioner. There are some people who have just a little bit of background in something. They might have done some wrestling in high school. And as a result, they only ever go on top. And they never train the bad position on bottom. Or they've started having an affinity for only the bottom position and they never train the top. Or they've got one move that works most of the time. You see this a lot with leg lockers, guys who come from a submission grappling background, and they might have a pretty decent Achilles lock or straight ankle lock. And every time they go into the guard, all they do is fall back and go for the ankle lock. Well, they're never developing their guard pass. They've almost got to put what they have on the shelf and learn the curriculum, learn how to pass the guard, learn how to stabilize side mount, learn how to get to mount, learn how to get from mount to rear mount, learn how to submit from rear mount. The sort of curriculum or the layout that we talked about earlier with the 6 basic positions, and put what they're good at on the side and get back to that later. Once you learn to pass the guard and you have leg locks, then you're really a force to be reckoned with. If all you are is only ever going for leg locks, then you're a one-trick pony and guys will figure you out. So even though it might not be comfortable to go and train areas that you're not good at, it's the best thing you can do for your development because you'll develop a rounded game. And ultimately, if you're a lot better than me, you're going to control where the match goes to, right? I might have spent all my time working on my top game, but you're better at wrestling or guard sweeping or whatever it is than I am, and put me on the bottom. I don't want to be completely lost. I don't want to get there and say, well, I've got no idea what to do now. So I think not developing a well-rounded game, and sometimes ego is the enemy there because it keeps you in the one or two things that really work for you. I think that's a pretty common beginner mistake. Another one is just to use too much strength, especially if you're big and bulky and work out a lot. Sure, strength is important, but if you're going against somebody who's not as strong as you, don't use as much strength. Use technique. Try to match them technique for technique. Don't try and use your superior attribute, because then you're just going to get used to relying on your superior attribute. But the sad truth is there's always going to be somebody who's bigger and stronger than you. And big and strong with a ton of technique beats big and strong every single time. Another real common thing is not breathing. A lot of beginners hold their breath because they're just freaked out. They don't know what to do. They think that they're defending their family honor or the honor of jiu-jitsu or the honor of their instructor. And they, as soon as things get a little bit stressful, they start holding their breath, which of course means they get exhausted, like completely floppy-armed, unable to move, exhausted in 15, 20, 30 seconds. And then they're screwed. Not only are they going to lose the match, they're not going to learn anything more in that match. They're not going to learn anything more in the rest of that class. They're done. Put a fork in it. So if they keep on breathing, if you get exhausted really quick, one of the first things to do is to make sure that you're breathing all the time. And it is way more important than any technique. It's way more important to check in with yourself every 5 or 10 seconds. Go, am I still breathing? Yes, I'm still breathing. Okay, move. Am I still breathing? As opposed to, trying to set up the world's best trick setup for the triangle. That's so far down the list. Not getting completely exhausted from holding your breath should be your first, second, and third priority, if that's your problem.
So I have a big question for you, and this may take a minute or two, but we can paint broad strokes here. And that is, I have about a year of experience. So let's say someone that's not brand new to jiu-jitsu, but someone like me that's got a little bit of experience with it. If I were to say, I will give you $1 million if I win this is a Tim Ferriss, for people listening, this is a Tim Ferriss question, but let's say I'd give you $1 million and we'll make it something somewhat crazy, but not outlandishly crazy, a purple belt competition, let's say world's competition, and you had 12 weeks to train me.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah, and obviously not easy, but that's the point of the question is you're well aware of. 12 weeks, $1 million, I'm like, here you go. If you can train me to win the purple belt competition, what would the training look like?
Tim Ferriss, one of his claims to fame is winning the the Chinese kickboxing tournament in China with minimal training. And he did, after not nearly as much training as the other guys competing in that. He won his division. I don't know what level it was. I don't know the details. But it's significant to know that the way he won it is by finding a loophole in the rules.
Right.
And essentially what he would do is push people off the stage as opposed to trying to box them or wrestle them or whatever the thing was. It turned into a shoving contest and was bigger and stronger and cut weight and shoved people off the stage and won. That's how he won against people who had way more experience than he. So I don't think if you went head to head with somebody who's been a purple belt for 3 years and competing at tournament after tournament after tournament, realistically, you've got no chance. Unless we find a loophole. And I'd say, depending on the tournament, your loophole there might be leg locks. If you can work on depending on the rule set, the IBJJF, which is the main federation governing jiu-jitsu, has done a pretty good job of eviscerating most leg locks and making it really hard to apply the most effective leg locks in a jiu-jitsu competition setting. And obviously, I'm not a fan of that rule. I don't know if that comes across when I started competing in jiu-jitsu, when I competed in jiu-jitsu, that stuff was all legal, and I thought it wasn't any more dangerous than it is now. So we'd have to find a set of a very, very few leg locks and drill the hell out of them and drill entries from standing, drill entries from the bottom. Because if you try and go toe to toe with, a really good, if you're a 1-year white belt and you're trying to go toe to toe with a really good purple belt, unless you've got a genetic freak of nature strength, good luck.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would gravitate towards more of a trick. And all that stuff I said about becoming well-rounded, at this point, given that constraint, I would throw it out. It'll really hurt your long-term jiu-jitsu development. But if we wanted to even have a shot of you doing well in there, it would have to be some area that is really underdeveloped in jiu-jitsu. Another option, depending on your physical attributes, might be to work your stand-up game. So to go and drill really just 1 or maybe 2 takedowns that are really good for your body type and sort of get 2 points there, and then really perfect your stalling skills in the guard while appearing to not stall. So you don't rack up penalty points. Neither of those are very beautiful options, but they are ways that you could maybe game the system. Of course, there are other people who've already figured this out, and that's their entire strategy. I once went to the Pan Ams. It was one of the 2 biggest jiu-jitsu tournaments in the world. And I think they were 7-minute matches that I was watching. And one big guy took down another big guy, ended up in his closed guard. So big guy number 1 takes big guy number 2 down, which gives you a 2-point advantage. And then his coach starts yelling, "Just hold, only 6 more minutes to go."
Wow. Yeah.
And so that's antithetical to everything that I believe about jiu-jitsu, which that jiu-jitsu is about going for the finish. It's not about stalling for 6/7 of a match. But that would be another way to game the system. And you've just given me $1 million incentive, so so we might try going about it that way. I still don't think the odds of success would be very high, but it'd be higher than just continuing training as normal.
So let me rephrase the question. I think that's a great answer, actually. And I love the whole idea about the loopholes. Let me rephrase the question to, I give you $1 million to get me the best possible start in 12 weeks of being the best jiu-jitsu practitioner in time. How would obviously I think things would change. And how would they change?
Wow. Really, it would be a ton of mat time and not very high intensity, and in order to maximize the amount of mat time, we actually couldn't go super hard. Like the sort of energetic and physical toll of having 2 or 3 hard sparring matches is probably the same as 10 not so hard sparring matches.
Right.
So we would try to have lots of not so intense matches with the occasional intense match thrown in. We try and really try and look at your body type and figure out what your natural attributes are. How's your balance? How's your endurance? How's your weight? Are you strong for your size? Are you flexible? And try and give you a really good game plan. I think the game plan ultimately is the key. Now, which game plan it is depends on those attributes, depends on what you bring to the table, depends what you're already good at. It depends on, did you train, did you do judo as a kid? Did you do wrestling? Do you have injured hands? Do you have weak grips? How are your knees? How's your endurance? Because depending on that, you can build a different game plan. And I've really seen people who weren't very good, but had a really solid game plan, do very well against people who are better, but had no game plan. And by game plan, I mean, first do this. Try to do this for 10 seconds. If this doesn't work, here's the second thing you do. If the second thing you do doesn't work, switch to the third thing that you do. Having like a series of if-then statements, it really calms the mind, and it allows you to start linking techniques. Now we start saying, here's a sweep. After this sweep, you're probably going to end up in this position. So let's work what we're going to do from this position. The example I always go to for that is Bernardo Faria, a friend of mine, who's a multiple-time world champion, multiple-time absolute, meaning no weight limit champion. And his number one guard sweep is something from a position called the deep half guard. And it leads right into, so he's starting on the bottom. He gets a deep half guard, which kind of looks like a koala hanging on the bottom of a branch. He does a sweep that's really, really, really hard to stop, and he's really good at it. And at the end of that sweep, he ends up in a position that leads right into his best guard pass, right? The over-under pass, just from the hand position and the way the body's positioned. It's like a jab connecting with a cross in a way that, a jab connecting into a lead hand hammer fist doesn't flow from one into the other. But for Bernardo, the deep half guard flowing directly into the over-under pass, there's hardly any adjustment. So that's an example of a game plan that fits together. So we would try and build you a game plan that would work really well. If that's to make you as effective as possible. If the question is more how to give you as much jiu-jitsu as possible, we would really concentrate on trying to make sure that you're well-rounded, trying to give you 2 or 3 really good options for every position. The top of side mount, the bottom of side mount, the top of mount, the bottom of mount, and just drill the hell out of them. So you're looking at somewhere in the realm of 16 to 24 techniques, and we would just spend an awful lot of time working on those. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And those 16 to 24 techniques, I'm assuming you probably have videos on all of them on your YouTube channel.
Well, I don't think that there are a magic number of, your magic escape from side mount might not be my magic escape from side mount, because I might have different attributes. Yes, on my YouTube channel, I do cover a lot of those techniques and a lot of the more advanced techniques. They're also in some of the apps that I have for sale. They're also in some of the DVDs that I have for sale. They're out there, but you don't only have to do mine. The point is, it doesn't really matter which 2 guard sweeps you learn. You just have to learn 2 of them. That's my approach to it. You don't have to learn the ones that I use. You might have different flexibility. You might have a different predilection, just being drawn towards a certain kind of game. So, of course, there are basic techniques that everybody has to learn. Everybody has to learn the bridge or the arm trap and upa escape against mount. I think that's fundamental. That's bread and butter. Everyone has to learn the arm bar from the guard. Everyone has to learn the hip escape and putting the person back into the guard again from side mount. Like, if you don't know those things, you don't know jiu-jitsu.
Right. So
those are some of the 24 or odd techniques that you should learn. And yeah, I've got videos on a lot of that stuff on the YouTube channel. But you don't only have to watch mine. To get a better sense of that idea, again, I would download the roadmap for BJJ, because it gives you, for each position, it gives you 5 or 6 sample techniques, and you just pick any 2 of them, or go find all 5 of them online. Go, hey, there's no way in hell I'm doing those first 2, so I guess I'm stuck with picking one of the last 3, because everybody's different.
So this will be my last Tim Ferriss-esque question, and then we'll start wrapping up here. But is there any, it could be lesser known coach, obviously other than yourself, any lesser known coach or someone that you follow in jiu-jitsu that you think we should maybe pay a little bit more attention to?
Oh, wow. You're really trying to get me in trouble here. There are so many good people, and there are a lot of people producing great content in their instructional apps, in their YouTube videos, even in DVDs still. Those still haven't gone away. I know that's weird. I've been predicting the demise of the DVD for 5 years now, and I'm wrong every year. But you know what? In the last year, I've learned a ton of stuff from a black belt called Rob Bernacki. I learned so much from him in such a short amount of time that I actually ended up making an instructional set with him. What his approach is very, very biomechanical. And let's look at the concepts of base, posture, and structure. How your body's arranged, how your leg bone connects to your knee bone for every position, and trying to get at the universal principles that make every technique effective. That's been really effective. His approach to guard pass prevention it's not anything new. There's lots of people doing that. But the way he put it together for me really helped me. It formalized a bunch of stuff that I'd been doing, but it wasn't part of a system. And we talked about the importance of a game plan. Game plans are basically systems, and systems trump techniques. That's true in business, that's true in jiu-jitsu, that's true probably in weight training, right? If you have a system of training, that's probably more important than the actual things that you're doing. Or like, should I do 6 reps or should I do 5 reps? It doesn't matter. Today's chest day. Kill your chest. Having a system for debugging jiu-jitsu is a really useful thing. And I think Rob, who not a lot of people have heard of, I'm doing my best to help people hear of him more. It's a good example of somebody who's not very well known, but should be better known and will be better known.
So I want to wrap up here with one final question that I ask all my guests. And this is a more general question. You can answer it however you want. And that is, if you could go back and tell your 20-something-year-old self some advice, or obviously alternatively, just tell the audience here full of 20-somethings some advice about life, what would it be? Big question.
Yeah, I wish I'd had time to prepare for this one. What wisdom would I drop? How about this? This has nothing at all to do with jiu-jitsu, but it really, 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 really matters who you scramble your DNA with, boys and girls. The easiest way to screw up your entire life is to get pregnant when you don't want to get pregnant, or make somebody pregnant that you shouldn't have made pregnant, or make somebody pregnant on purpose, but you two aren't compatible. I think you can give all the business advice in the world, but the odds of, the possibility of losing half of everything you've worked for and possibly ending up in nasty, nasty lawsuits and custody battles over children, like that just really can't be underestimated. And so be super careful who you scramble your DNA with. By all means, go ahead and do it, but just really make sure that person is the right person for you. I don't know has anybody ever given that advice before?
That is a first time. And
all right.
I think you just scared a lot of people, and they're going to rethink a lot of things that they're doing, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, well, those, oh, don't worry, she's probably not fertile right now. Not such a good idea, boys and girls. In terms of other stuff, it's amazing how many older people say stuff like, man, life just goes by so fast, or man, life is so short. And it's true. If you're listening to this show, if you're listening to Travis's episodes, then you're probably interested in taking action and actually accomplishing something, actually getting something done. And I don't know what that is. Maybe that's getting a degree in marine biology and working with seals, or maybe that's starting your own business, or maybe that's becoming a world champion rock climber, whatever the hell it is. You only get a chance to do a few things really well in life. So start focusing on it. Start figuring out how to do it really well and do it at a high level. And what goes along with that is not wasting time. I guarantee you that an hour spent working towards your goals, whatever they are, you'll get way more out of it than you will out of an hour of any Netflix show at all, or an hour spending on the couch, pondering the Doritos as you're stoned out of your mind from having, destroyed your bong. Like, honestly, the stuff that you do in your 20s can set you up for the rest of your life. It can set you up for an amazing life. But if you just screw around and waste time, you're never going to get that time back. And somebody else is out there getting a jump on you. So whatever your goals are, learning to work hard and work towards a goal, it's a learned skill. You do that in little ways. My goal for the next month is to work out every day for 30 days straight. Let's say that's your little goal. The discipline you develop there will translate later on in life when you're trying to start your eBay business, or you want to get to 1 million Instagram followers, or whatever it is that your plan is. The discipline that you've built in the little steps by working working out every day for 30 days, even though I think that's a bad idea, but whatever, it's a cool goal. Or reading a book a week for a year, or going to bed by 10 o'clock every night this week. Whatever that difficult thing to do, or more likely, getting up at 5 in the morning so you can spend an hour working on your side project before going to work. The discipline you develop by doing little things like that will pay huge, huge, huge dividends. And ultimately, that's really what jiu-jitsu or anything that's difficult is all about. It's about, there's no real compelling reason to roll around on the ground with men and try and crush each other and choke each other silly. If you're that worried about self-defense, get a gun. So if you're doing it for something more than self-defense, you're doing it for maybe self-development, you're doing something that's difficult and you're choosing to do it and you're pushing through on it. Now, maybe for you, that's not jiu-jitsu. Maybe for you, that's long-distance running. That's great. The discipline you develop, long-distance running, will pay dividends down the road as well. So I guess that's two kind of generalized bits of advice. So I've stolen a march on you. I've betrayed the trust that we had. I apologize.
No, that was great. I love it. I mean, the first one was a bit of a shocker and different one in a good way. And then the second one was very, very wise. So I very much appreciate that. Stephan, where can people find out more about you?
Oh, I'm all over social media, but really the best place is grapplearts.com. That's, or if you do a search for my name, you should get to my website pretty quick. That's sort of the central hub and the central repository for everything. So especially if you sign up for my email newsletter, when I put out a really good new YouTube video or a podcast or a new article, or there's something cool going on, you'll hear about it. But if you prefer social media, I'm on Instagram, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Snapchat, whatever else, on Twitter, Facebook. I'm all over those places, so you can find me there.
And for everyone listening, I have signed up for Stephan's newsletter, and you do get the roadmap to BJJ, which he talked about, which is awesome, and his newsletter itself very value packed. So I appreciate that. And Stephan, thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for everything you do. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been my absolute pleasure. I couldn't have thought of a better way to pass the last hour.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, make sure you hit the big red subscribe button down below. You can also check me out on Facebook and on Twitter. And I release a new video every Monday, and by hitting that subscribe button, you'll get those new videos every Monday. And this is really a podcast. It's also a website. You can check out the website. It's howtodoyour20s.com. I'll put a link right over here as well. And what it's all about is trying to improve your life. And we specifically focus on things that people in their 20s are interested in. So make sure you like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, whatever. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again on another video.